In this video, we are going to describe the first task of the linked data generation process, which have the goal of preparing and analyzing the data that we want to transform into linked data. In particular, we are going to take a look into the first 4 tasks of our process. In the first task, we will select the data source that we will transform into linked data. The steps to follow are: first, to define the requirements that the data source must satisfy, and second, to select one or more data sources that satisfy our requirements. The selected data sources may belong to the organization transforming the data or be external to it. In order to illustrate the tasks related to the data preparation process, we are going to follow a concrete example. In the task of selecting the data source, initially we defined the requirements that we wanted the data to satisfy: that they belong to a real scenario in the domain of smart cities, that the data are available to be used and in a machine processable format, the more structured the better, and that the data can be linked to generic entities, such as places. Searching on the web, we found a data set that satisfied our requirements: the energy consumption data from the Leeds City Council, which are available through the UK Open Data Portal. When we talk about data access, we are referring both to the technical means to obtain the data and to the legal rights to use them. If the data are not accessible, we have to identify who to contact in order to ask for such access. Once we have it, we have to obtain the data. Data might be accessible through different mechanisms: files, databases, streams of data, programming APIs, etc. Following with our example, the dataset can be downloaded as a CSV file, that is, a tabular format in which values are separated by commas. Licenses specify the legal terms under which a dataset can be used and exploited. We need to determine who is the data rights holder and which licenses have been declared for them. A drawback to this is that there are no legal recommendations or standard practices on how to declare licenses on data. The steps to follow when analyzing the license of a dataset are the following. First, we must identify who is the authorized publisher of the data, and we must differentiate between who is the data rights holder and the authorized publisher, because they may not be the same. Then, we must find which license applies to the data. Such license can appear in a web page, in the dataset metadata, in the data themselves. In case of doubt, we have to contact the data publisher. Finally, we must read the license and analyze the legal terms under which the dataset can be used. When analyzing the license of the Leeds City Council data, in our case, in the same Open Data Portal, we can find the license that can be applied to the data, that is, the Open Government License. Analyzing such license, we can check that it allows us a complete use of the data, provided we attribute the provenance. The goal of the next task is to understand how the data are structured and organized. The steps to follow in this task are: first, to analyze the data characteristics, which values appear, which value ranges, which data types can be observed, etc. Then, we will try to extract the scheme of the data by identifying the concepts and the relationships that appear in them. In the case in which the data has some concrete schema, the task will be easier. The opposite case appears when we are dealing with non-structured data. The metadata that appear in the web page of the selected dataset are not very descriptive and do not give much information for the analysis of the data. They only tell us that data are about energy consumption in different list locations and that they cover electricity, gas and oil consumption over different years. In fact, during the analysis we had to contact the people from the Leeds City Council to clarify some details about the data, which is something that usually happens when reusing data from another provider. The analysis of the data involves an exploratory analysis of such data. Since they are in the CSV format, they can be opened with any spreadsheet tool in order to analyze which data are included and the value ranges. Once this task is finished, we should have an idea of the meaning of each column in the table, along with the data type and range. We are also interested in identifying if there is some column with unique values, so it can be used as a unique identifier for our resources. Furthermore, this analysis will reveal potential problems that we can find in the dataset. In our case, the dataset contained repeated values. In some cases, the meaning of columns was not clear, and we found negative energy consumption values.